So, welcome, Martha. Thank you so much for being on the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. It's so lovely to see you again. We had a chat about a month ago, didn't we? And it was a great chat. And I just think it's going to be lovely for the listener to hear about you and what you're up to and get to know you a bit more. So, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Dupe. I'm thrilled to be here. I love it. I'm looking forward to this. And I think you and I share this feeling that this topic, alcohol, our culture, uh, all the gifts of pursuing an alcohol free life, there's so much to talk about. I never get tired about it. And it's so much fun. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So why don't we start for people that might not know you, Martha? Why don't you do a brief introduction and what brings you to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast?
I was born and raised in a very alcohol centric culture in New Orleans, Louisiana. It's a city that is maybe more associated with alcohol than any other city in the US. And, even the sort of official motto of the city, laissez les bons temps rouler, is kind of a French Cajun expression meaning let the good times roll. And if you wanted to make sort of a Spinal Tap movie reference, it would be that New Orleans is always taking it to 11. It's a very indulgent culture, but it's one that's steeped in hospitality. And that hospitality is just very wrapped up over the decades in alcohol. And I know that these things start very young, our messages about alcohol. So I grew up in a household where for Santa Claus, we left a plate of cookies and a scotch and soda. And I thought that was normal. These messages start very young. Then my husband and I, we met and married in New Orleans, but we moved to the West Coast and we got into the wine business. And we had felt a growing passion about wine, interest in wine, and we were very seduced by the romance of it and the lifestyle of it. And I'm going to be really clear and honest that I had wonderful adventures in the wine industry and with wonderful people that had big dreams and you know just that made this life that was filled with sensory pleasure, and we really were very steeped in it for a long time. So for 25 years I was in the wine business, and just over time I realized that I didn't like how alcohol felt anymore, and I did feel dependent. And I like to be able to be a voice for the idea that moderation really brought me to a place of dependency. I think we've had this cultural idea that as long as you're drinking in a moderate fashion and maybe sort of in a European fashion where you drink only with meals and with people, that is a way to avoid any kind of issue with alcohol. And I just think that's really not true. That really just that moderate drinking leads to a dependency, and I felt it. My body wasn't processing alcohol in the same way, and I stuffed down those messages that my body was giving me for years. I really did. I noticed in my, I'd say my early 40s, I could already tell that alcohol just felt different, but I didn't see signs and signals around me that supported the idea that there was another path to, I saw only paths that were geared for very dramatic rock bottoms. And it would have made all the difference had I seen other people talking about, wow, this isn't feeling great in my body either. That women have less of the enzymes that break alcohol down. These are things that I just didn't know. I didn't know how alcohol is very incompatible and not going to play nice with menopause. So these are things that I just didn't see the messaging around. But everything changed for me when I was introduced, just quite by accident, to a neuroscience based approach to um, taking a break from alcohol. And everything about that science based approach just resonated. It made it fun. Framing it like an experiment made it so doable and approachable. And it set it up so that there's no way to fail. You know, if you're a scientist in a lab and you have a hypothesis, it doesn't matter what data comes in, it's all data. And framing it that way made it feel like something I could try. And then it's just very personal. I get to see. I get to see how it feels. I get to decide. And I felt that along the way, during that process, there were so many other light bulb moments and insights that were way beyond alcohol, that were really just about human functioning and life. So I got more and more and more intrigued, such that I ended up jumping at the chance to get certified to be a sobriety mindful drinking coach. And so that's what I did. And I've been doing that now for 6 years. I'm 6.5 years alcohol free, and I'm
Amazing.
still regarded as the best decision that I ever made. So that's a little bit my story. And now I feel very lucky to split time between Portland, Oregon, where we've lived for a long time, and that's where our wine business was located outside of the city, and Paris, France, where our daughter lives, and also New Orleans, my hometown. So I love seeing the the non-alcoholic movement in these various places, and what's really going on.
Yeah, amazing. And it is incredible how conditioned we are, isn't it, from a really young age. I love the story you said about the scotch and soda. It's just bizarre how we have these rituals and we have these traditions and we've linked it. And as you say, New Orleans is like the party city. It's that city of just vibe and jazz and music, and it's got that feel. And again, depending on where you live, alcohol can be seen in quite a different way. And so I'm curious, with your three places, how different would you say they are? And in terms of when it comes to the alcohol-free movement, are they changing, or are you still seeing them the same as you were seeing them before you stopped drinking 6.5 years
They
ago?
really are changing, and it is stunning, I think. And I would imagine you're seeing the same thing. And I've had the occasion to be in the UK, and to check out some places in London, where there were so many fabulous things happening with non-alcoholic beverages, so many initiatives, so many fabulous brands and craft. And so what I would say is that it sounds at first like an oxymoron to think of New Orleans and the NA movement, but what I've come to realize is that any city that has a craft approach to cocktail making, to drinks culture, they are going to be the best places to find that same level of craft and professionalism and the savoir faire to make exceptional drinks that are alcohol free. And the drinks professionals in those cities are really just after making a great drink. You know, it's almost the alcohol is beside the point. They want that quality, they know how to get it. And so I'm seeing that in New Orleans now. And in Paris, I would say that 5 years ago, even 4 years ago, it felt like, oh, this is behind. This is not where London is. In London, I was seeing the grocery store with an end aisle display of non-alcoholic beverages. That was not the case in Paris. But what is interesting is how quickly Paris is, catching up and gotten very much on board. So several years back, I was really laughed at when I went into a wine shop and asked if they had a non-alcoholic wine, and I wasn't surprised by that. I understand, and I've been part of that wine culture where there's a source of pride. We feel that way in Oregon wine country. But it is remarkable how quickly it has changed. And just a few years later, I visited a wonderful wine shop that in Paris, and he let me know that the non-alcoholic wine that he was carrying was his single bestseller in the entire shop. Not his
Wow.
single bestseller of the NA, but of the entire shop. And
Gosh.
it's a wonderful product made by a biodynamic producer. So more and more wineries in the US and in France are seeing the demand, and they're responding. And so more capital is pouring in. But I'm all for it. And I think what Dupe this really gets to the heart of is people in the hospitality industry having the chance to really consider more deeply, what does real hospitality mean?
Mm,
And I sometimes have said, I want to publicly apologize because we ran a tasting room in Oregon wine country for many years. And you really could say, I just didn't see the non drinker. I felt like I was being gracious if I offered a cup of water, but someone had to be already sort of othered and sort of sitting by themselves for me to even notice. And that just wasn't good enough. And I do apologize for that. And I know that we can do better. So to have drinks professionals, hospitality professionals get to reconsider, you know, true hospitality, radical hospitality is making your guests feel seen. And by having those options, not options, by the way, that someone has to ask for, it needs to be on the menu. And to make it clear. And that is a way, what we sometimes forget is that that's the way to keep the whole group happy. The others in the group that maybe are drinking, they're not really happy and relaxed until everyone in their group gets what they need and is happy. So we can always keep that in mind, that it's really extending hospitality to everyone when we can make sure that, you know, the non-drinker has something special that allows them to be in the ritual with everyone else.
yeah, it's so true. I had Laura Willoughby on, who's Club Soda. So she's got the tasting rooms
Yes.
in London, which are fabulous in Covent Garden. And she talks about social inclusion, and it's all about social inclusion. It's all about, as you say, helping everybody enjoy their evening or their lunch or whatever it is they're doing, and people not being othered. And to your point, I think it's getting a lot better in terms of restaurants and bars, especially in the UK. As you say, there's always at least a couple of options now. And the supermarkets have grown hugely when it comes to NA products. And I know they're selling a lot more of them. And over the summer as well, I think it was one of the supermarkets, big supermarkets in the UK, said they're selling more NA stuff than they ever have. So it's definitely a growing market. And I think it's not that people aren't drinking necessarily. I think they're deciding to have that as well. So on certain days they'll drink the NA, the non-alcoholic, or they'll mix in an evening, and they will start with the alcoholic and then move to the NA. My personal view is, when it comes to things like moderation, as you said as well, it was holding you back. I think moderation, to me, if you are at the point where you're thinking, do I want to stop drinking? Do I want to take a break? Am I really finding that this is serving me, especially in your 40s and 50s when you are going through perimenopause and menopause? Alcohol is exacerbating those symptoms. So sometimes you don't even know that those symptoms are there. And things like anxiety, stress, depression, they're all exacerbated by alcohol. So if you feel like, and obviously the processing of alcohol as well, so the next day taking longer for you to process it, and actually realizing it's in your system for about 5 days before it completely disappears. And so there's so many things, as you say, that a lot of people don't know, but having the option to drink something non-alcoholic and as a choice, and not feel like you're being your second, or you're having to justify it. That seems to have changed, certainly in the past. It's been nearly 5 years for me that I've not been drinking. There does seem to be more of an acceptance of it, which is really helpful.
Absolutely. I love that you use the word options, and that's how I see it too. I am, um, there will be alcohol will still be around, and there are people who really do want to continue to indulge and enjoy it. And I am just pro options. And I love this comparison. Someone said once that, Starbucks doesn't see decaf as competition. And I love that. That so got to the point to me of like, oh, that's so true.
Mm,
The alcohol industry needn't feel, threatened by this, but just give us options.
mm,
And, you're absolutely right that people are doing both. And my friends who are retailers of non-alcoholic beverages say the same thing. All of their data is very strong that the vast majority of their customers, 75 or 80%, still drink alcohol occasionally.
mm,
So you're absolutely right. And having that option, I also really agree with you about moderation. I really, it is something that I think that this option is incredibly important. And by having a different message out there for our youth, there's an opportunity for them to really see alcohol very differently from the very beginning, to never embrace it as something that's just harmless, which is, I think, how I was, taught to embrace it, that as long as you don't do this, or this, you're absolutely fine. And they are seeing and hearing a very different message. So coming into it with more awareness on their part. For instance, my daughter texted to me this morning an article that she saw in Vogue that is a very detailed, thoughtful first person account of a woman taking a 2-month break from alcohol just to see. And it's very insightful and very detailed about how long the effects of alcohol last in our body. But her overwhelming conclusion was that she would continue to drink here or there. She's probably, much younger. I really think that makes a difference. And, but she did say that the 2-month experiment, she described it as life changing.
mm,
Nothing less than life changing. That's pretty significant. And her biggest takeaway was the impact on her anxiety, something that she previously thought was unfixable. I mean, that again is so significant. Something she thought was unfixable and outside of her control, the 2-month experiment showed her that that was not true. Her anxiety was dramatically reduced by not having alcohol. And so I just love the change that that is for our, younger generations. And my main goal, I think I would say, is that I know that growing up, I felt like I didn't see examples, models of people who were voluntarily getting off the alcohol train. And that had a big impact on me. It was something that you were either drinking or you were branded as someone that wasn't allowed to drink and had been kicked out of the tribe or something. That's not true for this younger generation, and they're seeing that. And so absolutely, I'm all for options. And what people are noticing is that if you put out options at your next party, attractively packaged, sophisticated, not kid drinks, these beautiful bottlings and artisanally created products, people will drink them. So it's very eye-opening to realize what is possible when we just have those options.
yeah, it's so true. I remember when I first stopped drinking, I would take bottles of things that I discovered to different parties and lunches or dinners or whatever with friends. And it always amused me because everyone was curious and they'd be, oh, can I just try? Can I just have a glass? And before you knew it, especially I started off by only taking a bottle. then really and learnt quite quickly that if I took a bottle, it would go.
You're
And so
right.
people would drink it and they'd be like, "Oh, that's nice." And then they'd go on to the booze, the alcohol, and I would have nothing to drink. And so then I thought, right, I need to I need to bring more. But it's so true that people are curious, and if it looks nice, and I'm a judge on the World Alcohol Free Awards, and I've done that for the past couple of years, and just seeing how the industry has expanded over the past couple of years. We had maybe 600 products that came to us, and they're so different now. To your point, you don't just have to replace what you've always drunk with something else. You can try so many different things, and they're things that don't even taste like the alcohol that we, the wine or the gin or whatever that we used to. There's so much creativity in this industry that it's making it really exciting. And it is fascinating how the younger generation just don't seem to see it as much as we did. But again, it comes down to all the subliminal programming that we had when we were younger. For me, it was Sex in the City. It was ladettes in the UK keeping up with the men when it came to drinking. It was this whole culture of women can drink as much as men, and that was a rite of passage. And we can do it all, and we can, and things like Scandal, like and Olivia Pope. I don't know if you ever watched that program, but again, this powerful woman in the White House who could drink all this wine every night and
Right.
seem
And
to
then
perform perfectly the next
that's
day.
right.
And so there's so many things that we think are true, which just aren't at all.
That's absolutely right. And there are never any consequences to,
Yeah.
the character drinking this, absolutely enormous amount. And yes, you talked about moderation, and I have toyed. I've said I'm going to write an article titled something like "I was shocked to learn I was a heavy drinker." And it's, it sounds so absurd, but I am being serious about that. There's something that I actually don't think gets talked about very much, and that is that there really is a gulf, a very wide gulf between what the scientists and doctors really mean when they say a moderate amount or a small amount and what we interpret. And I mean a gulf. And I didn't realize that. In fact, I almost felt like, am I being gaslit? Since when have they said that for women it's one drink or less a day? I just could swear that for throughout my drinking career, it was at least that they were saying two for women like that. But there you go. So that alone was shocking. But I also realized that, this is kind of drilling down a bit, but again, I don't hear this, kind of being referenced that we in the US, you talk about units in the UK of alcohol, and maybe that's more precise. In the US, we say a glass of wine, 5 ounces, and then in tiny, tiny print, it says, of 11 or 12% alcohol wine. But our average wines aren't 11 or 12%. We're drinking, I mean, if you're drinking a kind of big, bold California red, that's a 15% level. And there is a margin of error that wines are allowed when in that labeling, because it gets kind of technical, but you're ordering your labels before the wine is actually finished. And so it can be a margin of error of at least a percentage point, if not a percentage and a half. I mean, so you wouldn't believe the difference that makes from an 11 or 12% to 15.5%. That's an enormous difference. And so the amount of wine, I mean, sometimes that is kind of compelling to me, that I think, wow, that, I'm going to show one of these wine glasses that gets used for the fancy. I mean, isn't this about as big as my head? This is the kind of wine glass that we use for these big wine dinners.
Mm.
And it is, that it's so easy to be overserved in this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so if
absolutely.
I pour this is 4 ounces, and that would still be more if this is a 15.5%. So, you know, we're talking about such a tiny amount. So one of the issues that I have with moderation is the science is really tricky about it, and that alcohol does not lend itself to moderation. The first parts of our brain to be impacted by the alcohol is the prefrontal cortex, where decision making is resides. So and you've got the tradition of these enormous glasses, which in I think the UK too, in the US, wine glasses just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I took out my wedding china to look at it, something I had not, the crystal, wine glasses I hadn't used in decades. And these wine glasses were so little by comparison. So, I really do think that for people who have been drinking for decades, like I had, moderation is so unsatisfying, but everyone needs to kind of go through it and decide. It's just very personal. So many, or I'd say most of my clients will get to a point where they say, this is sucking joy, not giving it, this idea of trying to moderate. I'm only just staying in the decision making cycle, and I want to be free of that. So it is true that a lot of people arrive at that. But again, I just love that there are options. And, I think that people doing their own experiment is the best way to go.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And when you talk about the bold red wines, it reminds me of my own journey. So I lived in Spain for a year in my early 20s, and went to the vineyards and got into this sort of heavy red wine. And then I liked your Malbecs, your Riojas, and, as you say, 14-15%. And it got to about 2 years or so before I stopped drinking, or took my what was going to be a 21-day break. I then said, I realized that it just wasn't agreeing with me. But instead of saying, okay, I looked at the percentage and I thought, well, that's 14-15%. So I can look at the wines that are 11 or 12. So I went on to the Pinot Noirs, and then I went on to and then thought, okay, these aren't working. I'll go on to the white wines, or the Picot de Pinet. And, you just think, you have this whole justification in your head, and at no point do you say, well, actually, maybe I just don't need to drink it. Maybe it's just not agreeing with me. And so, to your point, I talk a lot about experimenting, and with moderation, especially. My view is, if you know that you need to moderate, or you think you need to moderate, you have two options. You can either moderate, as you say, or you stop. To me, I think stopping is the best thing, because I think there's a lot of mental effort that goes on when you're trying to moderate. But I say, if you think you can moderate and you want to moderate, and that's how you want to go, do a 2-week experiment. Most people, when they moderate, say, okay, my moderation is I'm not going to drink Monday to Thursday. Friday night, I'll have one. Saturday night, okay, that's my evening with my husband. We'll have 2 drinks. Sunday, I won't drink anything, and we'll start again. If you can actually stick to your plans when it comes to moderation, 2 weeks, and you don't deviate at all, you don't get back from work having had a rubbish day and think, I need to open a glass of wine or a bottle of wine and have a glass, which tends to be a bottle. If that doesn't happen in the 2 weeks and you can moderate, perfectly fine. If you find that you can't do that and you're actually breaking your rules, when you do that, you are actually impacting your self-esteem, your self-confidence, your self-worth, because every time we say we're going to do something and we don't, it does hit our identity. And so alcohol has this tricky thing. Alcohol's an addictive substance. Let's mess around and say, let's say what it is. It's an addictive substance. No matter how much you drink, you're going to become addicted to it. But ultimately, when it comes to moderation, it just amuses me the number of people say, yeah, I can moderate. When really, if you're being completely honest, if you can truthfully say, for 2 weeks, I'm sticking to my moderation plan and nothing changes, then yeah, absolutely go for it. Moderate as long as you want to moderate. But if you can't, then I suggest take a break, see how it feels. This lady that you talked about in Vogue, and when things are in Vogue magazine, you think, oh, well, they must be right. But that's the propaganda we've had for everything.
Yes.
But I do believe that actually, if Vogue are promoting this, there's definitely a change coming. If you think about the fashion industry and alcohol, that's massive.
I think
So
it's huge.
I think, if you can try it, you can moderate,
Yes.
you can actually stick with what you're actually saying, go for it. If you
Yes.
can't, try a break and see how you feel.
I'll look up the author of the article in Vogue, and again, I think I said I imagine she's quite a bit younger, and not always this blunt. I like for people to really see it as their personal journey, but I will go ahead and say my experience is that the people that can moderate are those that have never become dependent in the first place.
Mm, mm,
And people that, like me, were drinking, at a certain point daily and for a very
mm,
long time, it's really either you just say not possible or requires so much mental gymnastics that is exactly what people were trying to get away from in the first place. So again, it's personal, but what is a beautiful thing to see is when we can let go of that and realize that the freedom that we were looking for comes in, absolutely just embracing being entirely alcohol free. And I see it again and again. So I love that. It makes me think too of some of the kind of arguments that I know as a wine drinker and member of the wine industry that I used to defend my drinking and defend, my industry. And our brains are very powerful at defending a belief that we already hold. Our brains aren't all that interested in um, expending the energy and effort it takes to dismantle one belief and build up a new one. And this is what we do as coaches. I know you're involved in that same kind of work. So that is a beautiful thing to do with clients, is to help excavate those subconscious beliefs about the benefits of alcohol, and help through very strategic tactics help someone rebuild new beliefs by really identifying the evidence that they already have that contradicts a belief. So for instance, one that's very common is in the face of news like this in Vogue, or the World Health Organization coming out with things about the harm of alcohol, is, it might be the alcohol industry or just our own, minds saying things like, well, everything carries a risk. If I get in my car today, I'm at risk. And so please, let's not just keep beating this up or sweating this. And I get it. I was saying the same things, but what's so interesting is to realize that my clients, the people coming to me, they're not risk averse. They're not coming to me because they're saying, I am terrified by the recent report from the World Health Organization. No, they're finding me because they don't feel well. They know in their bones, in their gut, that this does not feel right. And it is not the World Health Organization that's putting them up to this. And then what is just beautiful to see is, no, they're not risk averse. They are getting on the other side of alcohol. And I have clients that are racing cars for the first time in their lives. I have several clients that are doing horseback riding. One who just sent me a text, thrilled that she'd finally signed up for the diving lessons that she's been talking about for years. So I really think it's just important to get that out there, that any idea that people are just getting too uptight about that, that's just couldn't be farther from the truth. What you and I get to see is that when people get alcohol in the rearview mirror, their lives are opening up, not shutting down. So I think that's a common, kind of myth. Do you feel like that too?
absolutely, absolutely. I really believe that it gives you a superpower, and it does make you brave, much braver than you were when you were drinking. A lot of people don't appreciate that
Totally.
they weren't brave, that they weren't taking any risks, they weren't doing anything that was outside of their comfort zone. They were just living in the muh, it was just the same old. And so when you stop drinking and you suddenly have this new lease of life, this new sense of energy, clients that I work with are just so much braver and so keen to try different things, and also really keen to help others. And I think we lose that sense of others as well, and society's become quite isolated in terms of people in their own houses or their own homes, and it's just them and their little community or their little family, and actually not seeing the wider piece and how they potentially help others beyond them. And actually, when you stop drinking, a lot of people want to then give back and say, actually, this is something that's really important, because it can change your life and in more ways than you could ever imagine. And so being brave and doing things that you could never imagine
Yes.
is just something that seems to be a byproduct of not
It's
drinking.
true. I love that you said the word isolated. I think that's another big myth and kind of something we use to justify our drinking. I've definitely heard this argument. Well, if alcohol maybe increases this risk of this, and this, but so does loneliness. Loneliness is a risk factor too. And again, that is truly a myth, and it is making an enormous assumption that people who are not drinking then are cut off from people, and what you and I see is completely different. And the fact that you and I met through a community that was all about sharing and embracing and getting together and meeting dynamic people who are choosing this lifestyle. There's been an explosion of sober adventure trips, travel, cruises, and you did your retreat in Bali. I mean, that is so cool. So people are having that opportunity to really meet people. I love how you mentioned Laura Willoughby from Club Soda. I got to meet her, and I think some people who loved maybe the culture of getting to know the brewmaster or the winemaker, I would just encourage you to realize you have no idea how dynamic and cool some of these producers of these NA beverages or people who are hosting these non-alcoholic bars. You will have that opportunity and then some. So I would just say that to anyone out there who is fearing, like I did and like many people do, that this will be extremely challenging for social life. Yes, we know, Dupe, that there are adjustments. That's, of course, that's natural. But what people can look forward to is there are lots of ways to get out there and connect and meet new people.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. I think with community being what it is, it's exploded in the AF world. I think about how many more people are talking about this, how many more groups have been set up, how many more alcohol-free coaches there are in the past 5 years. There was hardly anything 5 years ago, and it's just exploded, which has been amazing. So there's always someone or a group that you can find that will be your tribe that you'll get on with, and I think that's another limiting belief, isn't it, that we all had. For me, I thought anyone who was sober was boring. I didn't really trust them. I thought they had something to hide. I was, I was the cynic. I was the one that was then pushing alcohol on them as well and saying, "Oh, of course
Yes.
you can have a drink." And it's interesting how when you get to this other side and you see life in a very different way, and actually you then also reimagine what life can be and reframe it, and you look at maybe the people that were your friends for years and years, who you thought you had lots in common with, and then you suddenly realize actually it's only because we have a drink, and those people will go. I'm not saying nothing changes when you decide to take a break from alcohol. It does change, but the beauty of it is you probably get people that are more aligned to you, who you truly are. Because
Yes.
again, I think what we don't realize is we're wearing a bit of a mask when we're drinking. We are hiding something. We're either it's not the alcohol, it's not the drink that we want, it's the feeling that we're trying to create or the feeling we're trying to escape from. And if we are honest and look at some of, if I look at some of the people that I used to, hang around with, I had nothing in common with them. But for some reason, it felt like it was lots of fun when we went out and had a night out. Or you'd meet people randomly, and all of a sudden, you'd be like their best friend after a
Yes.
couple of hours of drinking. And it's just not the case,
So true. Best friends, and you make
So,
plans, and then you do
yeah,
not keep them in the morning because
exactly,
everyone's sleeping it
exactly.
off. That
Exactly. So there's so much there, and I do think you just become a lot more comfortable in your own skin, and realize there's a whole world out there for you to explore, and there's so many different people who actually you have genuine connection with, and you can have deep conversation with. A lot of people also discover that they may have thought they were really extroverted, and actually they're quite introverted. So they do enjoy spending time on their own and reading a book, or just spending time
I kn I noticed
chilling
that too.
out. And again, that's something that you just don't expect when you say you're going to stop drinking, which is why I find this whole journey, and it is a journey, and you need to trust the
Yeah.
process. And as you say, there's lots of work that needs to be done from a neuroscience perspective, from a subconscious perspective, reprogramming. That's what I do, and through things like my retreats, and I'm doing Marrakesh Magic, which is the one-to-one VIP experience in September, October, for a select few of people who want to come out to Marrakesh and have 3 days out here and 4 days of coaching. But it is about realizing there is so much more that we can change, that actually this alcohol free lifestyle isn't a negative in any way. And it can be anything we want it to be. And we can create a life that we truly want to live. And for me, that's the fundamental part of it. I think the ditching the alcohol is great, but if you're then still living under a rock and not actually enjoying it, or you're feeling like
Yes.
you're white knuckling it and you're not able to truly live, then something's off. And that's when I think going to you, or I, and actually getting coached and working out what those things are that are holding you back, potentially not allowing you to live your full potential, is important. So I'd love to talk about luscious, the word luscious. Can you use that for a couple of your
Oh,
programs? And I love it. And also lush, and then obviously your coaching in general. Let's touch on that.
I think it was because of the background in the wine industry, and also I had worked for Food Network chefs. And so I felt a real kind of attachment to the sensory experience and pleasure. And that was maybe my greatest fear, was that I had to give this up. And I really do remember it feels kind of foreign and hard to imagine right now, but I do remember thinking that fine dining and a white tablecloth and a whole production dining was dead to me. I really did believe that. And so, again, to let people know how much the brain is capable of changing. And because of that, I really one day had a big breakthrough and said, what if I don't have to retreat from the sensory experience and the pleasure of the table and all of this? What if I double down? What if I actually make this my whole, MO? And and that's when I really came up with this idea of the luscious AF. Luscious. I named one of my courses Luscious AF, and the other is Luscious 30, which is a 30-day break. What I want for my clients is that in an experimental break from alcohol, I want them to treat it like what I call a luscious sabbatical. To imagine if you were given a period of time, off of work, as some people are after years of service, what would you do? And how would you rejuvenate and renew and refresh? How would you nourish yourself? Very few people say they would burn the candle at both ends. So, what are those things that you would do? And so, I am really looking for my clients to just really add in the sensory pleasure and music and flowers and taking themselves out on an adventure, a date, getting out in nature, all of these things that really keep us in the present moment. They help sweep us out of the busy left brain, which is where the cravings, partially where cravings are residing in the first place. And but they up pleasure and joy and delight. We want to give our brain the bigger, better offer. When we are trying to change a habit, we must give the brain a bigger, better offer. And the more that we sort of slather on, all of these sensory experiences, we're going to keep deprivation at bay and make the new habit feel more rewarding. So, again, at the end of the experiment, if someone says, here are the things I want them to be able to look back on that month and say, I have to say it was lovely. It was, I took care of myself. It was pleasant. And why would we do anything else? We can imagine that if we were trying to change our habit and become a vegetarian, you wouldn't just serve plain, boring, steamed, vegetables that tasted terrible, and you would really, that would not make it a very appealing switch. So, in a similar way, I'm just inviting people to embrace all of the sensory experience that is available to us. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that. I really do. It's so interesting because I feel like I only truly discovered self-care when I stopped drinking. And that is quite curious. I think my self-care was going to a spa and having champagne. That was what my self-care was.
Same.
Um, so, I love that you're introducing that to your clients, lighting a candle and just sitting for with a beautiful sense coming, that's a really lovely thing to do, just doing things as you say that are sensory and,
Yes,
and
you talked
even
about being in the
tasting.
Medina in
Yeah,
Marrakesh.
exactly.
That just evokes, and what I love about that example is, our examples don't have to be, sometimes it could be calming and something relaxing, but self-care is what do I need right now? And sometimes that is energizing or an adventure,
Mm,
something very stimulating. And I'm picturing how stimulating that would be to be in the Medina with all these, the spices, the color, the
yeah,
noise,
yeah,
even that sense of like getting lost.
yeah,
That's, we can pursue those senses of sort of um, mystery and doing something illicit late at night. I love doing a tour of speakeasies in Paris. And,
mm,
I wasn't drinking alcohol, but it didn't matter. I was a full participant in it. And we, with the other guests, I had the best time.
mm,
It feels fun to be sneaking around and, sneaking into hidden doors and
yeah.
doing something late at night with a group of people you just met. So there's plenty of sensory experience, and it doesn't have to be just the soothing ones.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I love that. I think that's perfect. And so with your, you've obviously talked about those two programs, but I know you've got something exciting coming up in October. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
I would love to invite anyone that feels curious. And again, that's enough. If you just feel curious, to join me for a Sober October alcohol experiment. And we'll do this in a small group. So it's an intimate group. And it helps so much to have peers that are doing the exact same thing, have the same worries and concerns, and then share our wins and celebrate, all our discoveries and all of that. The information for all of that will be on my website, which is clearpowercoaching.com. And I definitely invite anyone that is just looking to dip a toe into this, please feel free to sign up for my newsletter. I curate it. I spend a lot of time researching and hunting things down because I want to share inspiration about the alcohol-free lifestyle, news from the industry, latest discoveries about alcohol-free beverages. So all of that is in a newsletter that you can just sign up for on my website as well.
Brilliant, brilliant. And maybe before we close, I'd love for you to maybe give someone one tip if they're just about to, if they're thinking, actually, yeah, now's the time. They've had a lovely summer. I know in the US, schools are going back this, or have gone back this week. And so maybe people are thinking they've got a bit more time to focus on themselves. What would you say would be maybe the first thing someone can do if they're really looking to take that?
I think it's wonderful. I think that we are sometimes asking the wrong question, and I know I was, so I should just put it on me. I was continuing to ask a question that sounded like, do I drink any more than anyone else in the wine industry? And looking around, and maybe even asking the question, do I have an alcohol problem? Do I have an issue? And it really just, that went on for years. And what changed was when I just suddenly said, wait a second, I am asking the wrong question. The question is, how do I feel? How do I feel? Doesn't have anything to do with anyone else in the wine industry or anywhere else. How do I feel? And instead of framing it as, do I have a problem? Do I think maybe I might feel better with a little bit less? So I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, yeah, we're so on the same page. That's the question I ask all the time. Would life be better in some way, physically, spiritually, emotionally, or mentally? If so, take a break and see where you go. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think is absolutely agree with that. So thank you so much. As you said, people can get in touch with you on your website. We'll put that in the show notes. And are you on social? You're on social media as well. So if people want to get in touch with you on Instagram,
Yes, on Instagram, it's Make Alcohol Small Coach.
excellent. Yeah,
So that's
make
fun.
alcohol.
I love
Perfect.
sharing things from my adventures in the various cities that we talked about. And I love giving shout outs to those establishments that do get it and are
Yeah.
giving us those options.
Brilliant, brilliant. And as you know, I love to end this podcast with the one question. What does thriving alcohol-free mean to you, Martha?
Oh, I think you really hit on part of it with the discussion of self-care, and that what I have learned is that that really means asking, what do I need right now? And
Mm,
sometimes that might be something soothing, but what I have found in this journey is I have given myself permission that I need time alone.
mm,
And it's in my time alone that I can fully feel my sensory experience. It's time alone where I don't feel responsible for other people's experiences
mm,
as a wife, as a mother. And so time alone allows me to fully feel my feelings and the sensory experience. What does inspiration feel like? What does creativity feel like? And it's in those moments that sometimes, ironically, that I meet people as well. By being alone, I am kind of open sometimes to some of the magic that can
mm.
just appear in small everyday moments, and sometimes the serendipitous meeting someone and having kind of a remarkable conversation. So that has really contributed to my feeling of thriving.
Oh, I love that answer. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for being an amazing guest on the podcast. Is there any final word of wisdom you'd like to leave the listener with?
I think we have covered it. I think just being curious is really the best first step. And Dupe, thank you. I think there's so many fun things that we can talk about. I never get tired of this. I think it's really fascinating. And to me, that is also important, to stay in a place where we're not making this feel heavy
Mm,
and like a big old problem. Fascination to me is a very animating emotion. So for anyone out there listening who's feeling, burdened or shame or stuck, try a little fascination and look outward and not so much making this your problem, but looking and saying, I'm fascinated. How did we get here in our culture? How do we treat alcohol? What are the messages we get? So yeah, I think a little fascination goes a long way.
Yeah, so good. Fascination. Love it. Thank you, Martha. We will speak soon. And
Okay.
yeah, I really appreciate you being on. Take care.
Thank you.